With this example, what we're going to be doing is deciding how that we can create a batching condition that's dependent on some condition being true in our model. In this example, we're going to be looking at this oven activity, and of course our condition is going to be whether the oven is available. We don't want to send any entities into the oven until it's ready to process the entities. So our condition is the oven available? And we only want to batch a fixed number of entities. The oven has a capacity of between 10 and 20 entities. So we want to be able to batch between 10 and 20. So we've got variability in our batch size. We also have variability in the condition of when that batch can be created. So it's a little bit of a complex situation that we're going to show you how to model here. So as we go to our first arrival, we just have a random interval on the amount of time between each entity arrival, and it's going to come into this prep buffer, and as it comes into the buffer, we're going to execute some logic to increment a variable. So we want to keep track of how many entities are waiting in this buffer. That's all that activity is going to do. And because of this route that we have right here, which is in this case a send route, the entities will not be able to move through to the oven until there's a send request. So entities are just going to come into the prep buffer and sit there and wait and keep track of how many are in there by incrementing the variable. Then once the entities get into the buffer, then we're going to wait 30 minutes for the oven time, and then they're going to exit after that. On the exit route, we're going to do one other thing with some logic, and that is we're going to set a v condition variable equal to 1, and I'll explain why we're doing that in just a minute. So just a quick summary, we have the work units coming into the prep. It increments a counter to keep track of how many entities are sitting in there waiting. Then they're going to wait for a send signal, and then once they get that send, they're going to come to the oven. Sorry, I forgot one thing. They're going to be batching according to a variable called vBatch quantity. So once they come in here, they're going to batch, wait 30 minutes, and then the batch will exit, and we'll set this v condition variable equal to 1. Now we'll get down to this trigger and show how all these pieces up here work together. On our trigger arrival, we're going to have just a one-time periodic arrival. In other words, only one entity is ever going to come into this batch trigger activity. Once we get in there, then we have some logic set up to handle that one entity. We have a while do loop, and what that's going to do is it's going to execute this block of logic over and over again, because our condition is while clock in minutes is greater than or equal to 0, which is always going to be true. Once you start the simulation, the clock is always going to be greater than 0. So basically this is just an infinite loop that executes over and over and over again. So our first statement in our while do loop is wait until v condition equals 1. Remember up here in this exit activity, we set the variable v condition equal to 1. And also, let me just show you how we initially set that up. If we go to our variable definition, we have a v condition with an initial value of 1. So if we go back to our logic, v condition is going to be 1 at the beginning of our simulation. So this statement will be true. The next thing it's going to do is check for our v count variable, which is being incremented in our prep buffer. And as long as there are more than 10 entities, it'll move on. If there are less than 10, it's just going to sit there and wait. Or, I'm sorry, it will it will not execute this statement. It will go down to the rest of the logic. So like I said before, we have to have at least 10 and no more than 20 entities to create our batch. So if the V count is less than 10, meaning the statement is true, and we don't have enough to create a batch, then it will go to this wait until statement and wait until V count is at least 10. Could be greater than 10, but has to be at least 10. Once we have at least 10 entities in our prep buffer, it'll go to the next if statement. If V count is between 10 and 20, then we have enough to create our batch. So it goes to the next statement and creates or assigns the VBatch quantity variable equal to however many entities we have waiting up in our prep buffer. So let's say there's 15 entities waiting. 15 would be assigned to our VBatch quantity so that when they get passed over to the oven and we do our batching, it knows, let's go back there real quick, it knows to create a batch size of 15. Let's go back to our trigger logic. Okay, so we set our batch size at 15, and then we use a send statement. Remember, we have a send route between the prep and the oven. So we issue a send statement to say send 15, in this case, work units to the oven. So it'll take the 15 that are waiting here, send all 15 over, create the batch size of 15, execute that 30 minutes in the oven, then execute out and reset our condition variable. Now let's suppose we have more than 20 entities waiting in the prep buffer. In that case, this statement will be false, so it'll jump down to the else and say, okay, we have more than 20, but the oven can't process more than 20. So we're going to set our batch size to a fixed number of 20. Then we'll send those 20 work units to the oven. Again, it will get to the oven, create the batch of 20 because we set our variable equal to 20, wait the 30 minutes, then exit out. And then our condition here, once we finish creating our batch, we set the condition back to 0, and we go back up to the top of the loop and hit the first statement again inside the loop, and it says wait until V condition equals 1. So our trigger entity, let me just move that out of the way, our trigger entity right here comes in, executes that first loop, sends the first batch through, then gets to the end here, sets V condition equal to 0, and loops back up to the top and sits and waits until the oven is empty again, because we don't want to send a second batch through while the first batch is still being processed. So this V condition variable being equal to 0 says, hang on, it's not done yet, wait until it's done. Then once it is done, we go back up to the exit route, set the V condition equal to 1, which allows our trigger entity to start creating a new batch size. So that gives us the ability to do a fairly complicated thing of having a variable batch size that only gets created under a certain condition of the oven being free.